Can you see the image on the screen? Let me read the words to you. On the top it says, cast down the mighty. On the bottom it says, send the rich away. On the left side, fill the hungry. On the right side, lift the lowly. And then what is, this is Mary, by the way, what is she standing on?
A serpent.
A snake. Yeah, a serpent. And if you can see it, there's a skull as well, representing death. She's standing on top of that. She has her hand raised in victory. There are stars sort of creating that aura in the background behind her. And she says the words of her song, the words of her Magnificat, or my soul magnifies is what she's saying. My soul glories in. And then she unleashes something that's a little bit like a song in the Old Testament, but it's a little bit different, her own. And she is doing this in response to the word that an angel brought to her, a messenger of God brought to her, that her child would be the deliverer, the Messiah. Would you open your Bible to Luke chapter 1, please? You can grab those, the blue Bible that's in front of you if you like. Luke chapter 1, and the page number that we will be in, or at least beginning, is 1588. 1588. Did you know these words were sung by, I don't know, a girl 14 to maybe 16 years of age who found herself pregnant, and the answer to her pregnancy was the Spirit of God did it. And I don't know how many people would believed her, actually. I don't know that we would have been folks that believed her. Maybe after her son on the cross and he rises again, maybe we believe her then. But I don't think you had to have some eyes to see and some ears to hear what was going on if you were to believe this middle school girl. So the situation that we're going to try to attempt to insert ourselves into today from the past is the one where Mary, she finds out that she is pregnant. And what she does after that is immediately goes to a relative, a kinwoman, possibly, if you want to use the word cousin, maybe, named Elizabeth. And so Mary finds out she's pregnant. Well, Elizabeth had this very similar experience, that she was too old to have children any longer. Her body was not producing eggs any longer to have babies, and so she had reached that stage in life, and yet an angel comes to her husband and says, you're going to have a son, and he laughs, and it wasn't the laugh of joy, it was more the laugh of I don't believe you. And yet here Elizabeth, she turns up pregnant in her old age, or at least past the age of childbearing, and Mary becomes pregnant while Elizabeth is already 6 months pregnant. And so she travels from where she is to go spend time with Elizabeth. And so in Mary's first trimester, Elizabeth is in her last trimester. And they are going to spend that time together. One of the phrases, or one of the lyrics to Mary's song, is to lift up the lowly. And the part of the gospel, or the good news, that we're going to be looking at this morning is the lifting up of the lowly. And in any society, any group, no matter where you find yourself in the world, there are always those who are considered low. And there are always those who are experiencing being low. And I think we talked about a couple weeks ago that everybody likes to think that they're better than somebody else. Everybody likes to think that they're better than someone else. And yet the Lord comes into our lives with the message of the gospel. He sort of equalizes things. And so mountains be pulled down and valleys be pulled up so that there is an equality in the Lord. There's an equality in the church. There's an equality in the family of God that you may not find, or most likely won't find, many places in the world, but to lift up the lowly. And so she goes to her, hang on, there you go. She goes to her cousin, her relative, Elizabeth, to spend these last 3 months. And I want to read starting in verse 39. At that time, at the time that she found out she was pregnant, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zechariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. Don't get too concerned. There's not many names in this text. Zechariah is John the Baptist's dad. Elizabeth is John the Baptist's mother. In verse 41, when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And Elizabeth, in a loud voice, she exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in the womb leaped for joy. Blessed is she who has believed that what the Lord has said to her will be accomplished." Neil and I and some others, Pastor Neil, we have been looking into and reading about, there's a lot of recent literature about trauma. Are you familiar with kind of the conversations in the country, maybe in helping professions, maybe in some academic professions about trauma? Trauma is something that we're kind of categorizing and calling what people experience, and let's just say for this instance, children or young folks, when whatever is happening exceeds their emotional ability to process it. And then it kind of gets frozen right there. And then if we don't heal from that, if we don't resolve that sort of thing, we carry in the rest of our lives ways that cope with that trauma, but really don't help us as adults. Does that make sense? All right. So a trauma can be neglect. A trauma could be death. A trauma could be pain, loss without grieving. I mean, that's a big one, right? A loss in your family as a child, but there was no grief. That's pretty strange. Poverty actually can be a trauma. Whereas if we don't get resolved, or if we don't find healing in that area, then we carry ways of functioning, ways of coping into our adult lives that actually don't help us get along with ourselves and don't help us get along with others. And really our actions and our attitudes and what we're involved in and what we think about, they end up being ways to not feel the pain of that trauma. And many times we don't even know it. We don't even know it. And so we can say, yes, in the new heaven and new earth, no more trauma. We all agree on that. And in the new heaven and new earth, no more pain, neglect, poverty, loss, grief. Every tear will be wiped from our eyes by God's hand himself. That's great. But what about now? All right, what about the years that we have to live and the injuries that we have taken as we've grown? And maybe sometimes we can have trauma. Maybe we can have trauma as an adult. Or more likely, we might, in an effort to somehow cope with that event or thing that took place in our childhood, we might end up finding situations that feel the same to give us some sense of normality, finding people that acted the same back then, and we might not even know it. And we do that as a coping mechanism, as a way to deal with that. But actually, that again doesn't help us heal, doesn't help us resolve. And in the world of education, elementary education, high school education, college education, those conversations, psychology, therapy, counseling, those conversations are happening at a very rapid pace as we live in. And the world has changed, and systems have changed, and structures that we counted on and didn't even know that we counted on have sort of broken or become unhinged, and that causes us grief. So in the last 5 or 6 years, many of us have experienced that type of thing in our lives. And for some of us, it reminded us of that thing in the past. But aside from all that, the literature or the wisdom or the data of this age is that for many situations, only having one adult in your life who provides stability, who provides trust, only having one adult that cares, one adult to process with, can be good enough to heal. Just one. Now, I don't want to stand up here as an academic and make those claims. I'm telling you as someone who is reading that, and also as someone who works with people on the street. That is my angle that I'm coming with. I'm not a researcher in this area. That one adult can help someone by, and some of the ways, the words that we use to process these things, that one single adult that you can trust, just one, can provide healing. And the way that it happens is, first, this adult verifies that thing did happen. Let's say that there was a trauma, a hurt, a neglect, poverty, an abuse in our childhood, and nobody will talk about it. Everybody, it's like the elephant in the room. Everybody's sort of in denial. There's no acknowledgement of it, and that exceeds our capacity as children to deal with it. We don't have the emotional wherewithal or the development or the experience to deal with things like that. But one adult coming into a child's life with loss or grief or something like that can verify, yes, indeed, you are not crazy. Yes, indeed, that thing did happen. Yes, it should not have happened. Yes, I accept you just the way you are. I will verify for you. I'll be your partner in verifying that bad thing happened. When nobody else will, I will still stand there and be a truth teller to you, so that you can begin to heal, so that you can start from living in the truth when all the rest of the world won't talk about it. One healthy adult can say, I'll talk about it with you, and that can provide the springboard for healing. And then this particular adult that is trustworthy, the child still has, like the adult that's trustworthy has to still permit the child to come checking in every once in a while. And push the boundaries. Are you still trustworthy? Can I still trust you? Do you still provide stability in my situation? Did this really happen? I need to ask you again, did it really happen? Because nobody else will talk about it. Like the child who's experienced the trauma needs an adult that they can continually check back with, just to get reassurance that the narrative that they see, the narrative that they've experienced, even though no one else will talk about that narrative, that's actually the true narrative that happened. This one particular adult can model a way to deal with feelings. Something bad happens, some sort of emotional injury, And we don't have the capacity as children, and most of us, even as adults, don't have like super capacity to deal with everything that comes our way. But definitely not as kids. And it exceeds our ability to think or feel, and everything is just immediately off the charts. Well, how do you deal with those massive feelings that you're having, but you're so disconnected from? Well, one single adult can model a way to deal with feelings. And it doesn't even have to be like a great way. It just has to be like one way to deal with feelings. Because then they'll learn, later I can deal with feelings in a different way. But I can at least process them. And one single adult in the face of trauma can show a way forward. Can show the possibility that yes, the future does hold healing. It's almost like we can reenact the incarnation of Jesus. By his bodily death, the trauma, and the resurrection of his real body, and his leading the way forward, then he can show a model, a way forward of to where we are heading, so that we know that ultimate and final healing is possible. And isn't that what we're looking for, really, is healing? To know that it's going to be a good end. To know that if it's not a good end, it's not the end yet. I mean, isn't that what we really want? Well, I wonder, I think Mary is she seems to be a tough young lady. I mean, she says some pretty powerful words, and she wouldn't have said those things unless she was expecting them in her own heart, unless she was praying through the Old Testament, for the Messiah to come, unless she was praying for the lowly to be lifted up, for that oppressive hand to be removed, whether that be from the Roman Empire, or the Pharisees, or the Sadducees, or the Zealots, or the Essenes, or the centurions, or the tax collectors, or death. She's wanting that oppressive hand to be lifted, and she's seeking Yahweh in order to do that, to send the deliverer. And so when a messenger of God appears to her and says, you are going to carry your baby, and that baby will be the deliverer that you've been hoping for and everyone's been hoping for. And, oh, by the way, it turns out the rest of the world too, whether you're Jewish or not. And I know what it's like for God to ask you something and then to sort of run your mouth and say yes and feel pretty confident in it. And then a little bit later think, did I really say yes? Do I really have what it takes to go through with this? Am I an imposter? I know the Lord said it, but I don't know that I have the smarts, or the gumption, or the money, or the beauty, or the cars, or the house. I don't know that I have those things in order to do that. And I can't imagine that there isn't some injury to Mary in this, some burden to bear. The Old Testament has some serious things to say about girls that show up pregnant, right? The law has some serious things to say about girls that show up pregnant. By her being pregnant, she just sort of like warped the money, the land, the babies of two families, right? By her being pregnant without a husband, there isn't these joining of a man and a woman, and that is economic and religious and social and civic and ceremonial. Like all of that sort of warps by her turning up pregnant. I can't imagine that her dad is pleased. I can't imagine that her mom is pleased. I don't know that. I just don't think anybody says, yippee, when Mary comes to you and tells you that she's pregnant. The leaders of the synagogue in her town, those 10 men, they would have been very upset about it. I don't know what kind of protection she was provided, but she has to endure that. Endure that everyone thinks that she's lying. And now maybe as she persists later, she's crazy. So you can imagine something that's true in your life that you have told people and they don't believe it. And you have told people and now they're starting to question your mental or intellectual capacity. You've told people this is what God has said to me or this is what God has done in my life, and they dismiss you. And they have evidence to dismiss you. These things do not happen like that. Biology and chemistry don't happen like that. And yet, you know that it's true. And so there's this really, it's a quick switch. They're really close, and you can be heading along in trauma and acting out of your trauma, trying to cope with trauma and bad things happening. And then when healing comes, it's a real, and you get a hold of it, it's a real quick flip to joy. And so when she goes and visits for her first trimester, and Elizabeth's, who is past menopause, for her third trimester with John the Baptist, the forerunner, the guy that will eventually lose his head by one of these kings that needs to be pulled down from being mighty. When they spend that time together, I know that they are inoculating one another or vaccinating one another from trauma. They're verifying, I am past menopause. I didn't have sex when I'm 14, 15, or 16. An angel appeared to me. An angel appeared to me. They're verifying these unusual, ridiculous circumstances to one another. And they have 3 months before John arrives to do that. And they live together in this friendship. Things that are happening to them haven't happened to anyone else. I mean, maybe in some old stories, long ago. But those are just sort of legends, you know? And yet this thing is happening in real space, in real time. And yes, Elizabeth is older, and she can permit Mary to check in repeatedly. Did this happen? Is this happening? Elizabeth, can I trust you? By this time, Elizabeth is starting to show, not starting, has already showing, so she can look at the baby growing. And then this baby, when Mary enters the room, jumps for joy. I remember when we were having our kids, and the closer we got to the due date, obviously the bigger the kids get. And so when they're like punching or kicking out of the womb, sometimes it looks like the Alien movie. You know? Skin should not, in my mind, skin should not be moving from the inside out. And so that's what happens when these two women come together. John leaped for joy. And Elizabeth has the concept that the boy that will be born to Mary will be the Lord of her and the Lord of all that's in her heart. And so they verify for one another that, yes, these things are happening. Yes, Mary, you're in the clear. It doesn't matter what the synagogue is saying. It doesn't matter what those 10 men in the synagogue are saying. You are in the clear. Yes, an angel did come to you. Yes, those things that your family said and are going to continue to say and are going to carry you around even after Jesus is born, are going to follow you around even after Jesus is born. Let's start healing from that right now. And Mary can check in and find stability and trust with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth has all these feelings, and she's had them for 6 months, plus she's much older and more experienced, and she's the wife of a priest. So she has insider information, inside baseball, to the doings of the community. And she is able to model a way of dealing with feelings for Mary. in this predicament that she's in this salvific, joyous predicament that she is in. And she's able to model and show a way forward that there is a possibility for healing that will take place. And it will be not just you, Mary, but your son as well, and for the healing of all the nations. There is that possibility. And I know it doesn't look like this right now. You don't even show. And people hate you. Friends and family from your hometown, they hate you. But there is this possibility that healing is forward. And what, I'm not sure that we preach on the beauty of what takes place in this relationship over these 3 months or more. I don't think we preach on that enough. To connect yourself with someone who can verify what you're going through and show you a way forward. But it's so close to joy that like the joy of the kings being the oppression being thrown down, the joy of the serpent being stomped on, the joy of death being done, that the lowly are lifted up. That joy, and the joy of a baby, the joy of having a child, which is possibly even, not for everyone in the world, but maybe for a lot of people in the U.S., is possibly even more meaningful to her than maybe some of us, not all, but some have experienced. This joy, it also is exceeding her emotional capacity to process it. She doesn't have the trauma and the joy at the same time. She doesn't have the capacity to process this joy. And so Elizabeth, in this situation, then is the person that can verify, yes, you should be happy. Yes, this is wonderful for the world. And that organizing that they do of each other's souls in that time, that community that they create in that time, that processes the trauma and verifies the joy and supports one another, it appears as if it just took one trusted, stable, engaged adult in Mary's life to make all the difference in the world. And so I ask, we step out of that world and into our own world. And obviously, a couple preaching points would be, one, can you be that for somebody else? Is it possible? Or do you need that from somebody? Right? It goes both ways. Do you need someone to verify for you that this thing happened? Do you need someone to be trustworthy and to let you check in often to see if this thing happened and to model a way of dealing with feelings and to show a way forward that is healthy? But I also think that this is a line to Avondale in that we organize with one another to deal with our hurts and our joys. I mean, isn't that what our congregation is about? We organize with one another. We organize with the neighborhood. We organize with people, teach people to organize on the street, to ask for what they want. We organize people on the street to, lift up the lowly. We organize in order to keep another lit alive with fire, to feel alive when there's so much addiction and overdosing and death and simple medical issues that don't get attention that should, and not enough money to pay the bills or the electricity or the heat or the sewage. I mean, isn't organizing with one another the type of congregation we are, so that in the midst of even the most difficult things, or even proclaiming the most joyous thing in the world, that a lot of folks say, resurrection, you're Josh. Come on, man. Right? You're really into the resurrection? You think that in a literal sense? Don't we organize for these same purposes? And isn't that what our congregation is? A place to heal and a place to find joy. I'm going to end with a quote, and your eyes are not deceiving you. This is the best I could get. I think it's from, I don't know, microfiche maybe? I don't know. But I'm going to read it to you. This is a theologian, historian from Peru. In 1984, this was an article that was a conversation. What's that called? An interview. The joy of the poor is always a challenge to the powerful and raises questions they are incapable of understanding because all they see is deep suffering. But the poor or lowly know how to be joyful. They know how to have parties, and in the religious sphere, they know how to celebrate the presence of God. I would wager that the powerful of this world feel more serene when the people are silent, when they are resigned, even when they weep. What is disturbing to them is that the poor laugh in the midst of their situation. But as the Gospel of Luke says, those who suffer today shall laugh tomorrow, and tomorrow has begun. Suzanne and Victoria, would you take us home?